Before the students start, I'd like to introduce our final round judges for today. Lead judge, who previously introduced herself, is Valerie Ruxel-Laxton, head of section of finance and economics for the EU delegation. To her left is Bruce Kasman, who is the chief economist for JP Morgan Chase. And to her right is Cardiff Garcia, who is the U.S. editor for the Financial Times Alphaville. So a round of applause, please, for our judges, and thanks to them for their time. And Valerie, I'll now pass it over to you.
So is the number one team ready? Are we ready? We're ready. Okay, off we go.
Hello, or as we say in Slovakia, ahoy. I'm Thomas Kovac, the Minister of Finance. Joining me today is Christian Healy, the Minister of Education, Evangeline May, the Minister of Agriculture, Isabella Patitucci, the Minister of Investments, and Elliot Reisman-Travanti, the Minister of the Economy. Today, we will be talking about the current economic situation in the Eurozone, and specifically focusing on Slovakia and its problems with high unemployment. First, we will look at the three indicators of economic success: GDP, inflation, and unemployment rate, and how they are affecting the euro area as a whole today.
GDP in the euro area advanced 0.4% on quarter heading into September of 2016. This is steady growth, but not at a desirable rate, especially considering it's below the 3% benchmark for healthy and advanced economy. The GDP per capita increased about 2% to approximately 34,000 euros. These numbers, however, do not account for the significant differences between individual countries' economies. Now Ms. Patitucci will discuss unemployment in the Eurozone.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Healy. On Figure 2, there's a graph of the unemployment rate in the Eurozone between 2008 and 2017. The seasonally adjusted unemployment rate in the Eurozone was at 9.5% in February of 2017. This is the lowest unemployment rate since May of 2009. As a whole, the euro area is forecasted to decrease 1.8% further by 2020.
Youth unemployment in February was at 19.4%, a number that still is concerning. We hope a successful integration and education of youthful migrants into society may play a role in helping that rate decline.
As you can see on Figure 3, a particular concern is long-term unemployment in the euro area. A reason for this is poor labor mobility. 2.8% of Europeans have moved or worked in a different euro area member country, whereas 30% of Americans reside in a different state than they were born in. Additionally, generous unemployment benefits also lead to a lack of urgency in acquiring a job.
Inflation in the euro area has also been a problem in the past decade, though a recent stabilization of the euro has helped the economy. Currently, inflation is at 1.5%, decreasing from 2% the past month. This statistic can partly be attributed to lower oil prices. We would like to maintain the recent level of inflation as the euro area progresses in the coming years.
Inflation in the euro area is important because it largely dictates the benchmark interest rates. As shown by the data on Figure 4, as the inflation rate has balanced out and approached the 2% benchmark, the interest rates have increasingly closed in on 0%. Further, the highest interest rates in the euro area occurred towards the end of 2009, which was precisely the same time as the worst period of GDP growth rate. As we all know, a low interest rate promotes investment, and in the past few years, the ECB's deposit interest rate has actually been negative. This has been done in an attempt to dissuade investors and smaller banks from hoarding cash in the ECB and not promoting economic stimulation in their own country.
A major effect of the economic crisis, and perhaps the most troubling, has been the rise of the far right in Europe. Groups such as the Golden Dawn in Greece, the National Front in France, and even People's Our Party Slovakia, led by extreme populist Marian Koleba, have been pushing anti-EU sentiment and blaming economic troubles on the political elite in their respective countries. Now more than ever, the future of the EU looks in question. Additionally, these far-right groups have capitalized on the rise of xenophobia and have promoted hateful discrimination against migrants. All this has led to a very turbulent political situation in the Eurozone.
Just like the rest of the euro area, Slovakia is recovering after the recession of 2008, and the economy is growing. However, Slovakia still has a major problem with unemployment that needs to be addressed if it wants to be competitive with other major European countries in the future and have a prosperous economy.
After joining the European Union in 2004, Slovakia experienced robust economic growth. Fiscal sustainability was their main priority. Additionally, strong progress on privatization and low labor costs attracted sizable foreign direct investment, which drove growth. The main FDI inflow was automobiles, and still remains Slovakia's biggest industry today. In 2007, the Slovak economy grew at 10.4%, the highest in the EU. However, the country has always struggled with high unemployment rates, and it so drastically affects their economy today.
Although Slovakia was hit by the recession, even before then, many economists identified long-term unemployment as the prime problem for the Slovak economy. This suggests the unemployment is more structural than it is cyclical, and even though the recession did contribute to unemployment, it had a greater effect on other indicators of the economy, such as GDP.
After Slovakia's velvet divorce, where they became an independent country, low job creation and low outflow rate hindered economic growth and led to an unstable economy. This is partly due to the legacy of the asymmetrical economic development between Slovakia and the Czech Republic.
You see, the growth of industry and the economy in Czechoslovakia was disproportionate in that Czech lands were industrialized prior to World War II. Slovakia, on the other hand, relied on the cheap import of raw materials and energy from the Soviet Union. As a result, after the breakup between the two countries, the Czech Republic was more prepared for global competition, and this is reflected in the current unemployment rate at 3.4%.
As you can see on Figure 5, Slovakia's unemployment rate was at a disturbing 14.9 in mid-2013. It has decreased slowly ever since and is at currently 8.4%. However, this doesn't truly tell the whole story. Now, if you turn to Figure 6, it indicates that long-term unemployment sets Slovakia apart from many other Euro area countries. The long-term unemployment rate in Slovakia is a staggering 61%, meaning that 61% of all Slovaks unemployed have been so for over 12 months.
Economic challenges in Slovakia include a sorry state of infrastructure, a lack of qualified labor, and a declining agricultural sector. These are mainly hitting the underdeveloped middle and eastern areas of Slovakia and are major reasons why the unemployment rate is still so high.
Because Slovakia's central bank does not have a chokehold on the monetary policy in the Eurozone, it is difficult for them to control the currency being transacted. However, Slovakia does have its own fiscal policy, so how the government chooses to spend is up to their economic leaders.
We believe there are three main solutions that need to be put in place in order to dissolve the high unemployment numbers in this nation. First off, however, we want to look at what Slovakia is doing right and take advantage of that.
As seen on Figure 7, an asset to the Slovak economy is the fact that the debt-to-GDP ratio is so low. Given its debt relative to the rest of the Eurozone, we feel that Slovakia has the opportunity to stimulate their economy while not falling behind the aggregate. Mr. Healy, can you please elaborate?
Of course, Mr. Kovac. Our policy change states that the Slovak government will initiate a 20.74 billion euro stimulus package over time. The breakdown of our stimulus package can be found on Figure 8. The stimulus funds would be allocated towards a crumbling infrastructure, vocational education reform, and other market sectors, such as agriculture. Slovakia has approximately 53 cents of debt per euro of GDP, whereas the Eurozone average is 91 cents of debt per GDP euro. So even with this expense, Slovakia will still be less than 10% below the average debt to GDP ratio.
Slovakia shares its currency with the entire euro area, meaning that they are unable to simply print money and introduce it into the market, which makes the low Slovakian government debt much more crucial.
Then is it a bad thing for Slovakia to be under a single monetary policy?
There are arguments for both sides. As we are seeking to borrow debt from the euro area, it is likely beneficial that we share a currency as loaning becomes much easier. If the ECB had to transact in different currencies and tackle individual monetary policies, it could be too difficult for countries like Slovakia to receive funding.
A particular struggle that Slovakia has been facing lies within the education system. Slovakia has encountered a major problem concerning lack of skilled jobs and qualified workers to fill these positions. Slovakia has many exports, but its greatest is automobiles. Currently, Volkswagen, Peugeot, and Kia all have plants in the country. This being said, it may seem logical that schools provide the proper education in these fields, but this is not the current case. Additionally, retraining workers as well as new workers, as well as existing workers in this field could be beneficial.
Many universities and schools have continuously struggled to produce graduates who possess the ability to obtain a skilled job, such as an engineer position at Volkswagen. For Slovakia to further improve their unemployment rate, more Slovaks have to be encouraged to study in the fields of technical sciences because companies have a high demand for these workers, and unfortunately, the supply is low.
You see, the auto industry in Slovakia is expanding, which could potentially help their economy greatly, but the education in the country cannot supply a sufficient amount of engineers. The worst case, yet very possible outcome would be for these companies to leave Slovakia, and we can't let that happen.
We believe the best way to solve this issue is to set up vocational training schools across Slovakia, including ones that Volkswagen, for example, builds, finances, and directly trains students to work at their company. These schools will provide specialized education for students, as well as pay them for their time and guarantee them a job at the plant. Volkswagen, Peugeot, and other schools would be in conjunction with government-funded ones.
Mr. Kovac, what would incentivize Volkswagen to pay for these students in schools, and what would they gain from this?
So we're suggesting that in return of financing and running a trade school, Volkswagen gets a small tax break for each school constructed. That way, they get their skilled workers and Slovaks receive jobs.
If this is done successfully, not only will the unemployment rate decrease, but the demand for teachers will increase, adding more jobs to the economy. Mr. Reisman-Chimati, can you please elaborate on our second proposal in tackling unemployment?
Of course, Mr. Healy. Slovakian infrastructure using World Bank rankings is in the bottom half of Eurozone countries. Many nations, including the United States, have used government funds to initiate infrastructure projects and give jobs to construction workers.
If you turn to Figure 9, you can see just how beautiful of a country Slovakia is. From the stunning Tatra Mountains to its lovely capital city of Bratislava, the country is regarded as one of the most attractive in Europe. However, we cannot let Slovakia's sheer beauty deceive the eyes. If you turn to Figure 10, you can see Slovakia's infrastructure, which is very poor relative to the rest of the Eurozone. Because of this, there is opportunity to improve. Investors are turning their heads away from eastern parts of Slovakia because its poor infrastructure makes it uninvestable.
Certain cities with small populations, including Trnava and Trenčín, are attracting comparable foreign direct investment to cities with much larger populations, such as Košice. This is because areas closer to the Czech border are more attractive to investors, as infrastructure and industrialized land are more developed. In turn, the unemployment rates in eastern and southern Slovakia are much higher.
Examples of infrastructure assignments would be roads, tunnels, bridges, and other building projects. Currently, one of the issues Slovakia is facing is the completion of the Bratislava-Košice highway. As of right now, Slovakia lacks the necessary funding to complete this project. We hope that our stimulus package would be able to solve this problem and ones just like it. And not only will this add more jobs to the economy, but it will improve the infrastructure and overall make Slovakia a more investable country.
Creating 350 jobs for each of 150 relatively small infrastructure assignments would allow for more than 50,000 new jobs to begin. It would also decrease the unemployment rate by almost 2% and assist the overall mobility of Slovakians within their own country.
Another problem in Slovakia is the declining percentage of GDP and employment that is justified by the agriculture industry. Slovakia has always been a farming country that has relied heavily on homegrown agriculture to stimulate its food industry and economy in general. As you can see on Figure 11, Slovakian farming days nowadays is significantly less utilized than its European counterparts. Its profit per hectare of utilized land is 15 to 20 times less than that of countries with a strong and developed agricultural sector.
The employment in the agriculture sector fell by 50% in the past decade. This decline is naturally being felt in more rural areas of Slovakia, where the unemployment rate is 17%, going beyond even 20% in several districts.
Food quality is also a massive concern among many Slovaks. There is a complaint of double standards where the same product being sold in Slovakia is of lesser quality than its European peers. We would like to reignite Slovakian farming in order to be more competitive with the international vendors.
This idea of having other countries selling agriculture to a large portion of Slovaks directly ties to having a single monetary policy in the euro area. If Slovakia were to have a different monetary policy than other euro area member states, transactions of goods would be more difficult, and Slovakia can make individual monetary laws to facilitate growth. So in this particular instance, it may be disadvantageous for Slovakia to have such a common currency.
According to a 2015 OECD study, Slovakia currently spends 1.18% of their GDP on research and development, a figure that is significantly lower than the euro area average of 1.65% and even lower than the European Union average of 1.95%.
We would like to set up a committee under the Office of the Minister of Agriculture that will evaluate modern agricultural projects. In addition, this office will be responsible for creating vocational programs parallel to the automobile ones.
There's a Slovakian proverb, bez prace nie sú kolače, which is literally translated as, there are no cakes without work, or no pain, no gain. We believe that in tackling the Slovakian unemployment crisis, there may be challenges and government debt may increase, but in the long term, it will be better for the citizens of Slovakia.
If these solutions are successfully employed and met with enthusiasm by the Slovak people and its government, we sincerely believe the unemployment rate and economy in general will reflect this in a positive way. We'd love to see these plans put into action and the quality of lives for many Slovaks improve. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. We're going to start with a question about the outlook for the global economy, which has turned actually more positive recently. How and why might this benefit the rate of GDP growth in the euro area?
Sorry, could you repeat the question one more time? I didn't hear you.
Yeah, the outlook for the global economy has turned more positive recently. How and why might this benefit the rate of GDP growth in the euro area?
So with the growth and the just the stability that the euro area has been experiencing in the past years, so after the economic recession, everything started to stable out a bit. And so countries are and along with the help of the ECB's quantitative easing program, countries are more able to readily receive funding and more readily like export goods to other countries and undergo fiscal actions in their own countries to stimulate growth, which helps the overall GDP of their country and as the euro area as a whole.
In addition to what Mr. Kovac said, as the outlook for the global economy is getting better, we can see that people are more likely to invest their money in the economy, and which will in turn raise GDP growth rate in individual economies.
Okay. The second question is, the inflation rate in the euro area has increased steadily in the past year, that you have shown on your chart. How and why has the monetary policy of the ECB influenced the interest rate, the inflation rate? Sorry.
So the ECB has tried to increase spending as inflation was below the 2% benchmark that they hoped for. So they've taken low interest rates, both loan and deposit, in an attempt to encourage spending and dissuade people from keeping their money in banks.
Can you tell us a bit more about how you arrived at the specific proportions for each component in your stimulus package? And also, did you consider, for instance, tax cuts in addition to all of the various spending ideas?
So to start, the number 20.74 billion euros is super specific, but we got that because at that amount of money, it would still be below the 10%. Still be below 10% of the average debt to GDP ratio for the Eurozone. So we wanted Slovakia to still be below the average by a good amount while spending as much money as we can.
Right. And in terms of the proportions of the individual programs, they're based on how we can affect change in that area using as limited amount of capital as possible.
Right. And about the tax cuts, so we propose giving tax cuts, small tax cuts to Volkswagen or any other private company that sets up vocational training programs, like an automobile company, for example, in an effort to encourage them to undergo that action and set up a vocational training. So definitely that would play a part in that too, yeah.
Okay, so you identified clearly that there are problems with infrastructure, with education, and obviously with long-term unemployment. And you point out that there's fiscal flexibility to address those problems. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts as to why that's not being done right now in Slovakia, and if there are impediments that you can identify, how you might suggest getting around them.
Right. So part of the problem in Slovakia is that their infrastructure projects have been, because as part of it is because of the rise of the far right in Slovakia, hasn't been encouraging that. Since they've gained more seats in parliament, they've been encouraging Slovakia to move more towards military expenditures and like that. And this is actually demonstrated if you go to figure number 19 in the binder. It shows how in the past years, the military expenditure in Slovakia has actually risen. So right now, because of that far right resistance in Slovakia, the far right movement in Slovakia, it's been moving a bit more military, which is something we would not like to see.
And,
Go ahead.
and additionally, as we mentioned, Slovakia has been facing problems completing things such as the Bratislava-Košice highway. So introducing the stimulus package, but still showing that the debt to GDP ratio would still be under the Eurozone average could help this happen.
And in terms of education, while there are vocational programs available to Slovakians, only 1% of adults and approximately 1% of Slovaks enter into these programs. So we would want to increase that number.
Also, creating vocational programs in more rural areas of Slovakia would encourage people who might not have access to proper education that comes in specialties to really learn about different specialties and help them get a job afterwards.
Just to follow up on that question on infrastructure, should the investment in infrastructure only come from public funding, from government sources, or do you see any other way to finance infrastructure?
We think that the stimulus package, because we wouldn't be going into it, 20.74 billion is a lot, but it wouldn't make it wouldn't make Slovakia's debt incredible, and it wouldn't affect the value of the euro very much. We think this is a viable option to address the infrastructure issues.
Right.
And since we're introducing this 20.74 billion euro stimulus package over time, it's gonna really decrease the risk of inflating the euro.
So you have a fiscal program which is, if I understand correctly, suggesting that Slovakia raise its debt levels up close to what the European average is, which is 90% of GDP. But the rules in the European system actually require debt levels to be moving towards 60% of GDP. So do you see a problem with your partners in the monetary union in terms of moving towards such a significant rise in your public sector debt levels?
Right, and we do realize that, but given Slovakia's position next to other countries and given the current issue that it has in the country, which is really a structural unemployment issue that has to be fixed, we believe that even if they have to increase the government debt, that overall it's going to be a lot better for the economy in Slovakia and the euro area, because of course Slovakia exports a lot of cars and automobile parts. And so we hope, and additionally, having the stimulus funds being allocated over time, we hope that as the funds are put into the Slovak economy, this will cause the GDP to increase additionally. So it might be lower than actually 10%, because as the debt may be increasing, but additionally the GDP is increasing also.
And though Europe has placed some regulations on debt, annual debt increase for members of the euro area, many countries have violated this rule, and we think that the benefits of this would outweigh the costs.
You spoke about some of the sectors in the Slovakian economy that are strong and how you can build on those strengths. I'm wondering if you also think that the economy should rebalance in some ways and should start to develop new industries where traditionally it wasn't very strong.
So right now in Slovakia, we're actually seeing the tourism industry emerging, and that is a way, we didn't include it in our stimulus package because it's a growing industry already, but that is in a way a counter industry, or not a counter, but a balancing industry like effect.
And as we improve the infrastructure and make it easier to get to the more rural areas of Slovakia, we're hoping to see tourism increase as it's easier to get around the country.
Right.
Okay, time's up, folks. Thank you.
you.
Thanks.